सत श्री अकाल एंड वेलकम टू सीजे सिद्धू शो। जिस तरह तुहानूं पता ही है कि एवरी थर्सडे असी थोड़ी गल कराई दी है किसी पॉलिटिशियन नाल, कम्यूनिटी एक्टिविस्ट नाल, किसी डॉक्टर नाल, ताकि जिहड़े करंट इशूज़ कम्यूनिटी फेस कर रही है उहदे बारे फर्स्ट हैंड इनफॉर्मेशन तुहानूं दित्ती जा सके। जिहड़े एक्सपर्ट हैगे आ या पॉलिटिशियन हैगे आ ओह तुहानूं फर्स्ट हैंड इनफॉर्मेशन दिंदे आ कि अपनी शहर दे विच की चल रहा है, सिटी ऑफ सरी की चल रहा है, ब्रिटिश कोलंबिया की चल रहा है, कैनेडा की सिचुएशन की है। सो लेटली देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ इशूज़ हैपनिंग इन आवर कम्यूनिटीज़ at a city level, at a provincial level, federal level. So there is a lot of challenges people are facing. मतलब ये कोई कहने दी गल नहीं, सारिਆਂ ਨੂੰ पता है, पर we are heading to a holiday season. We have to be happy and positive even in the difficult time. So ये सारियां political गल्लां करन लई we have a very special guest. I don't think she need a much introduction. MLA from South Surrey, Elenore Sturko, and newly elected in September of 2022. And she's the shadow minister for mental health, addiction, recovery, and education. Very, very all the important, sensitive issues, lot of things are happening. And I can't find a better person to talk about this. She's a South Surrey resident and have a lot of experience. I graduated from Kamloops High School, served in the army, in the armed forces. If I go on her resume, half of the interview time will be gone. So I will try to be brief. Then she was an RCMP officer, spokesperson. She was a TV host before that. And so very well versed, lot of experience. And the best thing about her is she don't hesitate to speak her mind. Politicians कई बारी डर जाते हैं, कोई गल जिहड़ी हुंदी है सेंसिटिव इशू है ते उहदे बारे गल करना नहीं मंगदे. And her passion is as a champion of human rights and has an advisor on matters related to gender, sexual orientation, harassment, equity, and inclusivity. So this is a very powerful side of Elenore. Please join me welcoming Elenore.
Hi.
Hi, how
Wow.
are you?
That was a very kind introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's well deserved. You served your time in the community and different roles. And so let's get to the serious issues that our community is facing. Any opening remarks you want to touch upon?
Well, there's a lot happening right now, and I think you hit on it in the introduction. You know, there's a lot, especially as we go into the holiday season, you want to try and stay positive. And so, I mean, I hope that people will hear this show that we're doing today, and I don't want them to lose hope. We have a lot of problems, but I think that there's a lot of solutions that can be delivered. And so, you know, going forward, I'm sure that we'll be able to address a lot of people's concerns.
So Elenore ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਕਸ਼ਨ 'ਚ ਕਿਹਾ ਆ ਵੀ ਬੜੇ ਡਿਫਿਕਲਟ ਟਾਈਮ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਪਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੌਲੀਡੇ ਸੀਜ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਪ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਉਹ ਲੂਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮਾਂ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਸੋਲਵ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ, ਟਾਈਮ ਟੱਪ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਡਿਫਿਕਲਟ ਵੀ ਟੱਪ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਗੁੱਡ ਟਾਈਮ ਵੀ ਟੱਪ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਸੋ ਇਹ ਹੌਲੀਡੇ ਸੀਜ਼ਨ 'ਚ ਆਪਾਂ very serious issues, we talk about it. So let's start with the BC's, that's the very current news, Elenore. BC's, because you are also a shadow minister for education, grading system. So, you know, rather than A, B, C, now you are going with the proficient and, you know, emerging and developing and, you know, exceeding. There's a lot of confusion. And even in ministries, polls done, 69% people are against it, only 13% in favor. What is your take on that?
Well, I'm disappointed to see that after the results that the government received from its own survey, that they still went ahead to push forward with the changes to the report cards. And CJ, the reality is that there's so many problems within education. for them to focus on something really so topical, so surface level, is disappointing, because I would have liked to see more of the government's resources and time, and because there's only finite resources. I would like to see them focusing on things that really matter, which is bringing up literacy rates, bringing up numeracy rates, and making sure that everybody has equitable access to education, and that doesn't exist right now.
ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗ੍ਰੇਡਿੰਗ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਚੇਂਜ ਕੀਤਾ, ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ABC ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਲੀਅਰਲੀ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਮੇਰਾ A ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ B ਗ੍ਰੇਡ ਹੈਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਈਜ਼ੀ ਟੂ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡ ਸੀ। ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗ੍ਰੇਡਿੰਗ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਬੜਾ ਕਨਫਿਊਜ਼ਿੰਗ ਹੈ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਐਲਾਨੋਰ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਲਸ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਆਪਦੇ ਪੋਲ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ 69% ਪੀਪਲ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਹੈਗੇ, ਦੇ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਥਿੰਕ ਟਵਾਈਸ। But even Minister of Education Rachna Singh saying today, like if people still have issues, they can go see a teacher. On the one hand, they're saying they're so busy and stretch out for a time with the grading and stuff. How teacher can get a time to meet parents? Well, and I'm not talking about one student. Like, look at the number of students.
Well, and that's part of the problem, is that our education system is already like so stretched. Teachers are at their limits. Classroom sizes are bursting. We don't have enough resources for teachers, and so to put this change on teachers at a time when they're already so pressed is actually irresponsible, in my opinion. And I've heard from so many parents and teachers that one of the biggest things that is missing right now in school is adequate support to deal with students with learning disabilities or behavioral health issues or neurodivergent children. Teachers don't have enough resources to help when they have, for example, an autistic child in the class. I heard some horror stories where there's actually people in our community whose child can only go to school for 1 hour a day, because they don't have the resources to help, which means that the parents aren't getting the respite that they need, which means that the child is being denied their access to education. And so when you look at what's more important, changing right now our report cards when teachers don't have time to make these changes, and nobody was asking for that, by the way, in the first place, or to spend our time trying to address these deeper issues about access to education, about whether or not the way in which students are learning, their needs are being met, and to make sure that teachers have every resource available to them in the classroom.
So ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹੈ ਗ੍ਰੇਡਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਐਲਨੋਰ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਆ ਕਿ there are more deeper issues, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਨੀਡਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਔਟਿਸਟਿਕ ਕਿਡਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ 1 ਘੰਟੇ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਿਆਣਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਸਪੈਂਡ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ। ਸੋ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡੀਪਰ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਲਿਟਰੇਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ, ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲੈਵਲ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉੱਤੇ ਚੱਕਣਾ, ਉਹਦੀ ਬਜਾਏ ਇਨ ਦ ਮਿਡਲ ਆਫ ਟੀਚਰਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਤਾਂ ਟਾਈਮ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਆ। ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਕਾਰਡ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਤਾ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਟੀਚਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਇੰਨੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ, ਕਿੰਨੇ ਕੁ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਮਿਲ ਲੈਣਗੇ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਆਲਰੇਡੀ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਟ੍ਰੈਚਡ ਆਊਟ ਆ, ਤੇ how they can meet that. So the last question in education side is, Elenore, so one side is this, they're stretched to a limit. Now the portable numbers is increasing, and they are not properly, like in the summer they don't have a proper air conditioning, and the winter time they don't have a proper heat. What's happening there?
So, this is one of the most disappointing things, is that during the previous election, we heard the NDP promise that they would eliminate portables. That was probably a very unrealistic promise, and I think, it was very misleading, especially for people here in Surrey, but across the province, there's tons of portables. It's time for the government to get out of its own way. We find that the government is, people have offered solutions, including right here in our home school district, including the mayor of our city, finding different solutions. For example, having schools take over multi-level business, previous business sites, so that they could have at least a temporary school. But the ministry drags its heels. We don't have time to wait. In Surrey, they predicted that we would have, around 1,500 new students, and we had over 3,200 new students. So even with the schools that they're building, the portables they're bringing in, and the modulars, it's still not enough to meet the capacity. And so we need to move faster, and to do things. If there's a vacant office building, for example, why not temporarily house some part of a school in there, because they have access to things like elevators, so the school's accessible. They're already wired for computers, and we have actually portable toilets now at some schools in Surrey. They've had to bring in porta potties. Yes. So, I mean, taking over a different type of a building would at least allow kids to use the bathroom inside. So I don't know what this government is doing, and I think that Minister Singh really needs to expedite things. It can't always be a longitudinal big study, 10-year study. We need schools now, and we need classroom spaces now.
ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਦਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ, ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਉਮੀਦ ਸੀ ਵੀ 1500 ਨਵੇਂ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਹੋਣਗੇ, 3200 ਨਵੇਂ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਆਏ, 3200। ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਕਪੈਸਿਟੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਚੁਣੀ ਸੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਮਿਸ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਨਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਦੇਣੇ, ਇਹਦਾ ਪੋਸੀਬਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਅਰੇਂਜਮੈਂਟ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਜ਼ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇੰਨੀ ਬੈਕਵਰਡਸ ਹੈਗੀ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਔਨ ਹੈਂਡ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਫੋਕਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਘੱਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲਸ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੇ। ਈਵਨ ਦਾ ਟੋਇਲਟਸ ਇਜ਼ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲ ਨਾਓ, ਐਲਨੋਰ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇਨਸੂਲੇਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਜੇ ਗਰਮੀ ਦਾ ਗਰਮ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ, ਚਲੋ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਸਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ, ਪਰ ਠੰਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਛੋਟੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਸੋ it's to digress a little bit, the portable in the hospital, like come on, like in a Surrey Memorial Hospital, like in a advanced country, developed country like Canada and British Columbia, and we consider to be a rich country, and we are portable in the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I understand on the one hand why, the need, especially during cold and flu season, to make sure that there's more space. We want to make sure there's more space to separate people who might have cold and flu or COVID. But we knew that this has been happening for a while, that we need that more space. So where is the extension, on the emergency room? Where is the capital investment in making sure that we have bringing in more spaces to our Surrey Memorial Hospital sooner? And the reality is that we are so underfunded in healthcare south of the Fraser. So Surrey, anybody in the valley, we're not receiving the same healthcare equity as people who are on the north side of the Fraser River. And it's really underserving, particularly in things like maternity, in pediatrics. We're the busiest pediatrics emergency room here in Surrey compared to anywhere else in the country. We're even busier than BC Children's Hospital, and yet we receive much less resources. We have a much smaller footprint. And so we're, and another thing actually that really I think hits home, particularly in our South Asian community, is that we have a lack of cardiology services here. Our South Asian community is hard hit by heart disease. There's some genetic factors there, but also some dietary factors. But whatever the reason, we need to have the ability to treat people's heart conditions here on this side of the Fraser River, so that anyone from Surrey all the way out to the valley can get the services that they need. We've had far too many families lose a loved one to largely treatable heart problems, and we need that equity to really be brought into healthcare here. And it starts with, the example of it. The photo that represents it best really is photos of those portables being brought into our hospital.
ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲ ਸੀ, ਹੁਣ ਹਸਪੀਟਲ 'ਚ ਪੋਰਟੇਬਲ ਆ ਗਿਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਚਲੋ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਇੱਕੋ ਦਮ ਫਲੂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਵੀ ਉਹ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੈਪਰੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ, ਟੂ ਦੈਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਇਜ਼ ਓਕੇ, so other people will be not affected with the flu. But on the other side, ਜਿਹੜੀ capacity ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਡਿਵੈਲਪ ਕੀਤੀ, ਕੋਈ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਫੰਡਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਹੋਰ ਨਵੀਂ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕੀਤੀ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਧਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰੀ 'ਚ ਇਹੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, other side of the lower mainland, from New Westminster all the way to Vancouver, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਹਸਪੀਟਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਇੰਨੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਨਹੀਂ। ਐਂਡ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਹੈ, ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਹੈ, ਐਂਡ ਕਈ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਵੀ ਆਰ ਪ੍ਰੀ ਡਿਸਪੋਜ਼ਡ, ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲੀ ਕਾਰਡੀਅਕ ਹਾਰਟ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈ, ਇੱਥੇ ਕਾਰਡੀਓਲੋਜੀ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਅਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਨਿਊ ਵੈਸਟਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਇਹ they have to put their act together, because what happened is I went last week to see somebody in the hospital, and hallways were full and people were screaming, and I honestly, and people were literally screaming for help, like calling a nurse or whatever. And when you are in a hallway, you don't have a button or you can call a nurse. And I thought, you know, this is like,
It's
this
horrifying.
hospital look like a third world country hospital, unfortunately. And I feel so bad for nurses and doctors. They do the best job. My heart goes out to them. They do their best job. There is nothing against them. It's the system. How we fix that?
Well, there's so many ideas that I have. Actually, I just had a very interesting policy conversation with someone that came to my office yesterday, asking me specifically about Surrey, the things that I want to see. Obviously, you know, the cardiology improvements here, things like that. But the system-wise, you know, we need to make sure that we're looking at the way that we're running healthcare as a province. And there are things that we can do. Hopefully when our healthcare platform comes out, I can give more details, but you know, things that would actually create efficiencies. But I'll give you an example. So for your viewers that don't know what methadone is, it is a medicine that's given to people who have heroin addictions. And the most common kind to receive in British Columbia right now is called methadone solution. So it's a kind of like liquid. The molecule of it is very easily absorbed. But British Columbia does not list any generic brands, only brand names as being available for pharmacists to fill the prescriptions that are needed. And there's probably 1,000 people at least that use this medicine, thousands. But the fact that they only have the name brand and not the generic means that we're wasting money. And I'll tell you how, because the generic brand is the exact same medication formula, and yet it costs 1/2 to 1/3 the price. And British Columbia already used this medication during a methadone shortage that happened in March of this year. And so that medication was good enough when we had a shortfall, but not good enough forever. But then the point I'm trying to make, CJ, is that if we would be more efficient in some parts of healthcare, like let's review pharmacare to see if there's other brands that we can bring in. Because if you could save millions of dollars just in the brand of medications that we give to people, we could reinvest that money into our hospitals and frontline workers. So it's not necessarily about cutting things, but you know what? You need to be creative, you need to be brave, and you need to say, look, we have to find solutions that are actually helping save money. When your grocery bill is tight, you look for things on sale.
True.
Right? You
True.
might not buy the brand name Ritz crackers, you might buy the
or
President's
you go to
Choice.
the produce shop.
Yeah, exactly. You'll go and try. So we need to do things like that in healthcare in areas where we can save money. Like, for example, introducing generic as a choice, consumer choice, not forcing people, but offering those consumer choices. We can't cut money for nurses and doctors. We need them, and we need to make sure they're compensated in a way that attracts them and keeps them. But there are ways we can save money so that we can boost those frontline resources and boost capital investments, and that's what we have to do.
So ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੈਲਥ ਕੇਅਰ ਤੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫੀਲਡ ਐਜ਼ ਸ਼ੈਡੋ ਕੈਬਨਿਟ ਦੇ ਅੰਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਫੀ ਨੌਲੇਜ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹਨੇ ਕਿ ਲੋਕੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਸਿਸਟਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੈਰੋਇਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਐਡਿਕਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਥੋਡਨ ਪ੍ਰਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਮੈਥੋਡਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਬ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਨੇਮ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਡਰੱਗਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਉਹੀ ਅਲਾਊਡ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ BC 'ਚ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਨੈਰਿਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਕਟ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅਲਾਉ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ। ਉਹ ਜਨੈਰਿਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਕਟ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਸ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਓਰੀਜਨਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਬ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਨੇਮ ਉਹ ਸਮਾਨ ਉਹੀ ਸੇਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ। The mixture is the same in a generic and the brand name, but the price is double or triple than that. So ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ introduce ਕਰ ਰਹੇ। So system problems ਇਹ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ they are not addressing the root cause of the problem. I talked to a federal health minister as well when I was interviewing him. He was in Vancouver. I said, you giving the funding money federal government give because it's a provincial jurisdiction, but why don't you make them accountable? Because if it have to be, and Kevin is a big believer when he was a health minister, it's a pay by performance, not changing the system. But if the hospital doing a good job, give them more money than the hospital that is not doing a good job. That can be applicable to these issues as well.
I really, my heart is with healthcare providers right now and with patients. When you talked about people being in hallways and having to literally scream for help, it's disgusting, and it's not in any way, shape, or form acceptable. I don't accept it from this government. I would not accept it from our government if we should form the next government. And so I think that we need to make sure that, yes, there is accountability, and it starts at the top. We've actually been calling for Minister Dix to be removed from his portfolio. And the reason for that is because he has mismanaged our healthcare system over the last several years, including, we used to, CJ, have one of the top cancer programs, best outcomes in the entire country. And now we're like one of the worst. The time it takes...
We're going across the border.
We're going across the border, but they're not even managing that properly. They are not sending the full capacity of people that could be going there. We're not sending them. That's a failure, and we keep reading probably day after day, your viewers may have seen it in some of the newspapers and stuff, stories about people who were offered medical assistance in dying instead of being offered treatment. And then they ended up going to other countries, and now they have, and this should never be the case in a province that has as much talent and as much capacity really to do better. But it's about how we manage those things. And I think right now under the NDP, the management of what was once a world-class system is completely collapsed.
So ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਹੈਲਥ ਕੇਅਰ ਤੇ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਦਾ ਮੈਨੇਜਮੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਵਾਈਡਰਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਪਰ they stressed out, the physicians are stressed out. Hear the statements every day, the wait times today they were talking, gone from 2-3 hours to 6, 7, 8 hours. So ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਏਡੀਅਨ ਡਿਕਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਕਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਰਿਜ਼ਾਈਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਰਟਫੋਲੀਓ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੰਭਲ ਰਿਹਾ। Well, let's switch the gear now. Talking about methadone, that comes to your area of expertise and also Shadow Minister for Addictions. We are losing about 6 people a day in British Columbia. 6 people. Mostly it's young. It's an alarming situation, overdose and dying. What is it? Where we stand there?
Well, I can tell you that, so it's been over 7 years since a public health emergency was declared. A public health emergency related to overdose deaths. And at the time, it wasn't even half of what the deaths are now. But what is actually so alarming to me beyond those deaths is the fact that the government doesn't act like they're in an emergency. Think about when we were in COVID. At the height of the pandemic, how quickly things got shifted. If we needed to have a testing site, boom, 2 days later, I'd be tent up. You could drive through and get tests, and we would see things very quickly. Getting to acquire things like ventilators, all that PPE gear that people needed. They was acted like lightning speed, but they don't act that way with the opioid crisis. In fact, just
they are not treating it as an emergency, and it is.
No, I mean, you would think, and I can tell you that if I was the minister and not the critic, I would be handling things a lot different, because I think that we need to act like it's an emergency.
Totally.
We have to think of it from the mindset of we can save 6 lives a day. That don't have, people do not. It's not just the person that dies of the overdose. It's the ripple effect on the entire community.
Totally.
And there's a much deeper
families, and it crosses all boundaries and all lines.
Absolutely.
And people, when they lose the young one, they get devastated. And I want your quick take on that. The lack of education part as well in the families and a support system, because I know in a South Asian community, it's sad to say that when somebody dies of overdose, family feels so ashamed and they call it a heart attack.
I know.
He died of a heart attack.
I know.
What do you say about?
Well, okay, 2 things. First and foremost, I hope that people don't. There is no shame in addiction. It is not a moral failure to develop an addiction, and in fact, it can happen to anyone. But one of the problems and one of the ways that we could overcome that is that if there was more education publicly, people would be seeing outside of their community, at a bus shelter, at a bus stop, at the athletic park, anything where it would have more information, and that where people would feel comfortable even getting a glimpse of some warnings, for example, or education information about the harms of drug use. and then having the ability to go and find those resources even in their first language. And I think that there is a lack of that type of information publicly available. Think again about COVID. You would see those signs everywhere that says stand 6 feet apart, wash your hands, wear a mask. Those were awesome. And they actually,
people followed that.
Yeah, they followed it and they changed behaviors. But now, have you ever seen a sign in public right now that says that using drugs is harmful?
ਸੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਡਰੱਗਸ ਤੇ ਓਵਰਡੋਜ਼ ਦੀ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਮਿਸ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਯੰਗ ਪਰਸਨ ਓਵਰਡੋਜ਼ ਨਾਲ ਮਰਦਾ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਫਸੋਸ ਕਰਨ ਵੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਫਿਊਨਰਲ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਬਈ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਹਾਰਟ ਅਟੈਕ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੋ ਐਲਾਨੋਰ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਇਹ ਸੱਚਾਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਆ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਝੂਠ ਬੋਲ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਿਆਣਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਟਰਗਲ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਗੈਟ ਅ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਹੈਲਪ ਦੇਰ ਇਜ਼ ਅ ਹੈਲਪ ਪਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਐਲਾਨੋਰ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਮੈਜਰਸ ਬਣਾਏ ਵੀ 6 ਫੀਟ ਅਪਾਰਟ ਵਾਸ਼ ਯੂਰ ਹੈਂਡਸ ਡੂ ਦਿਸ ਡੂ ਦੈਟ ਐਂਡ ਪੀਪਲ ਡਿਡ ਦੈਟ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਹ ਓਵਰਡੋਜ਼ ਦਾ 6 ਬੰਦੇ ਮਰਨੇ ਰੋਜ਼ ਯਾਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਜੇ ਸੋਲੂਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਐਜ਼ ਏ ਐਮਰਜੈਂਸੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਟਰੀਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਐਂਡ ਯੂ ਆਰ 100% right about that so let's see you become a minister one day and how you will address overdose issue.
Yeah, I've said I would handle it like a true emergency, and I was in the military before. I was in logistics, and so I really see an opportunity. And same with when I was in policing. You see a problem, and you set up an action plan, and you deliver on that action plan. This government, about a week ago, did a reintroduction, a sort of a re-announcement of a program at St. Paul's Hospital, which is actually a very good program. Unfortunately, the scale of it is far too small for what we need right now. And the full implementation of it is not due until March of 2025. So if we're in an emergency, having programs being announced that take 18 months.
And they're launching in March 2025?
Yeah, and so it's like, we need something tomorrow. We needed it yesterday. So we need to take action today to do it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, we saw that in COVID, that you don't have to, when they wanted to have these testing sites and you could go get your tests and stuff, you didn't have to have a brick and mortar building to be perfect.
No,
you just needed a place to go. Yeah, a tent. And so, my idea, honestly, is to make sure that we're using every available resource, and in some cases that involves triaging people in not permanent buildings, but maybe we do set up tents, maybe we do set up mobile stations where we can triage people and
like
get them help.
Especially East Hastings,
absolutely
heartbreaking situation there. And why don't we funnel the sources? So ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜੇ ਬਣ ਗਏ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕੀ ਸੋਲੂਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਟਰੀਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਐਜ਼ ਏ ਐਮਰਜੈਂਸੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਰੀਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਟੈਂਟ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਾਟ ਵੀ ਲਵਾਉਣ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਟੈਸਟਿੰਗ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਟੈਂਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਜੇ ਇੰਨੀ ਐਮਰਜੈਂਸੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗਾਂ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਈਸਟ ਹੇਸਟਿੰਗਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਲੀਕ ਨੇ ਪੜੇ ਆ ਲੈਟਸ ਸਵਿਚ ਅ ਗੇਅਰ ਅਗੇਨ Elenore if you there is in a RCMP there was a sexual harassment cases 6 Mounties came forward female and then you came out and
actually those are municipal police
yeah
and so they were not RCMP
okay so municipal and then you came out yourself that you were also a victim of sexual harassment and I was surprised that you had a PTSD post-traumatic stress disorder and tell our viewers this situation how alarming it is and how you handled it.
Yeah, so the PTSD diagnosis that I got it maybe in 2018 or 2019, but that was after a decade of really
And at that time you were also a
police officer.
Police officer and a spokesperson.
That's right, yeah. And so for me, a lot of the issues that I had dealt with that led to me developing a workplace stress injury were dealing with some very serious collisions and suicides and deaths and violence. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was related to the gender-based harassment that I experienced. But yeah, some women from municipal police actually contacted me to see if I would be willing to advocate for change to the Police Act in BC to better protect women police in municipal policing. And during that, decision to help advocate and help these women, yes, I did also share that I was part of the Merlo-Davidson class action lawsuit. And some of the gender-based harassment and
when the $100 million settlement happened, and when the check came, you were not
upset.
happy. You were
No,
devastated, because I think, tell me a little bit about it. It's a very sensitive issue in a way, close to your heart as well, but it's very important our viewers to know about that.
Sure, and I'll tell you a little bit. So that harassment, it didn't happen here in the Lower Mainland of BC. Actually, I experienced that when I was working in the Northwest Territories. And that was a really difficult time, and it really changed my perception of my employer forever. I think I had more of an idyllic sort of view of what my job as a policewoman would be. And as a result of those interactions that I had with my colleagues, it really damaged I guess it took away from that, romantic vision that I had of my job.
Disappointment in a way.
It made me disappointed, yeah. And I think it doesn't mean that I still don't have a lot of admiration. Obviously, I do for all police and for the RCMP as well, and respect. But, so after I participated in the class action lawsuit, and I did receive a settlement, and when the check came, I didn't feel happy. You have a lot of feelings inside yourself about the disappointment.
It's not about money.
No, not at all. The disappointment that you feel, the guilt, because, when you're part of an organization that's also very tight like that, there is a sense of guilt that I felt, even though I knew I was right and I should not be harassed or discriminated against. I still felt guilty going against my employer like that. You feel a sense of guilt. And when you receive a payment, it's what you're really looking for is acknowledgement and an apology, which a check is not either of those things. So now that I have this opportunity as someone in the legislature to be able to support other people who want to see a legislative change that can better protect women and men, to be honest, from workplace harassment, sexual assaults, and gender-based harassment and violence, I took that opportunity. And I actually had never planned on sharing that I was part of Merlo-Davidson in the RCMP, but since I did disclose that, a lot of people have come forward to tell me that they were happy that I did share that. It can happen to anyone, and that everyone needs support.
And I commend you for doing that, because coming forward, and you were on the front line, RCMP spokesperson, now you are on the front line as a politician. So ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਹਰਾਸਮੈਂਟ ਹੋਇਆ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਊਨਿਸਪਲ ਆਫੀਸਰਸ ਕੇਮ ਆਏ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਲਾਸ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਸੂਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫਾਈਲ ਕੀਤਾ, ਐਲਨੋਰ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ, ਐਂਡ ਸ਼ੀ ਹੈਡ ਅ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਆਫ ਸੈਕਸੁਅਲ ਹਰਾਸਮੈਂਟ। ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਕੇਸ ਸੀਗਾ, ਮਰਲੋ ਡੇਵਿਡਸਨ ਕੇਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹ 100 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਦਾ ਸੈਟਲਮੈਂਟ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ। ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਆਇਆ ਨਾ ਚੈੱਕ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਦਾ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਇਹ ਸੀਗਾ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪੈਸੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੰਨੋ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਗਲਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਗਲਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਤਲਬ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਹਿਊਮਿਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ gone through that PTSD and all that kind of crazy stuff that nobody wants to be there anyways. So ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਮਤਲਬ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸੀਗੀ। So this is now related to this topic. We are talking about sexual harassment. Lately, there is a big issue of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity issue, and there was a lot of demonstration happened in Lower Mainland, especially in Surrey. Some provinces tried to make it differently, they said. And, another day in a Punjabi press club, John Rustad, leader of Conservative Party, former BC Liberal and BC United MLA, and he has extreme views about that. So what do you think? Like they said, there have to be a certain age where parents' opinion versus what is a reality. It's a very I know very.
Yeah, I smile and I laugh a little bit because John Rustad was one of the people that helped bring Soji in. He was in cabinet at the time when the former BC Liberal government introduced Soji, so he was right in the heart of it and a big supporter of Soji when he brought it in. But I smile because there's so much misinformation. The reality is that for young students, and I've confirmed this, as education critic, that if a child asks to change their name, for example, or be called something different, parents, unless there is a reason to believe the child would be at risk, so if there was, a suspicion that the child may be involved in violence or whatever, they will always tell the parent. And if they're worried that the child is at risk, they're going to contact the ministry. And so this idea that kids are changing their gender identities and their families aren't knowing is actually not accurate. And one of the things that's also funny is that John Rustad should know, considering he was one of the ones that brought in the legislation for Soji, is that it's actually encoded in our BC Human Rights Act. So it's a human rights framework. There's no lessons, like no one's teaching you how to be gay at school or teaching you to be transgender. But what it is a framework that says that things like sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression are protected from discrimination and also recognized that people exist. So for example, when my kids came to the Surrey School District, they would learn a lot about Diwali and about Vaisakhi, and they learned about Hanukkah, and they learned about many other kinds of things culturally, and about people. And so Soji just means that while we're learning about those things, we also recognize that other people exist too.
I'm glad you said very well. So मैं इन्होंने पूछा सी जो sexually orientation and gender identity का काफी role. I did a full show with one of the people who knew a little bit more about that, Lavi Pannu, one of our co-hosts. We gone in a very detailed form, and you're expert in that. And so ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਬੈਡਡ ਆ ਇਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਜੌਨ ਰਸਟੈਡ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੁਣ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦਾ ਲੀਡਰ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਡਿਨਾਈ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਪਰ ਉਹਨੇ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਿਆਂਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨ that's a big problem with double standards with the politicians. They do something when they are in power and do totally different when they have a different strife.
He's campaigning right now on misinformation. Okay, that's what I will say. I'll be so bold as to say that that's a campaign of misinformation, because even the idea that children would receive access to puberty blockers or to sex reassignment surgery in a school is an out-and-out lie. In fact, there's only one place really in British Columbia where your child can receive care for gender dysphoria, and that's through the BC Children's Hospital. And so your child is not receiving access to medication at school. They're not receiving visits to a gender clinic. This is all just fear-mongering, and I think that it's wrong for any party to take these kinds of misinformations and try and run with it to gain support.
ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਸੈਂਸਿਟਿਵ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਆ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਮੈਡੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਜੇ ਲੋੜ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ BC ਚਿਲਡਰਨਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਸਪੀਟਲ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਇਲਾਜ ਹੈਗਾ ਬਾਕੀ ਇਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੌਨ ਰਸਟੈਡ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਆ ਹੁਣ ਐਂਡ ਉਹ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟੋਟਲੀ ਮਿਸ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗਲਤ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਐਂਡ I like the point Elenore brought that ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੀਵਾਲੀ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸੀਦਾ ਵਿਸਾਖੀ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸੀਦਾ ਸੋ when come to education part when we live in such a diverse communities with the different cultures celebrating different events like everybody like you did with your children everybody should do so then we have a better harmony and we're living together in such a peaceful
absolutely because learning about something doesn't necessarily mean you're being converted to it.
Yeah.
Like when I learned about different Sikh holidays, I didn't become a Sikh. Yeah. I just understood that it existed, and I have a lot of respect for it. And that goes for anything. And I think that British Columbians should be afraid of anyone who would want to open up the human rights legislation, because that's what protects each of us. That's what protects us from discrimination based on race, religion. And I think it is extremely frightening that any politician would want to tinker with that. It's fundamental that each person's rights in British Columbia and in Canada are respected. In fact, people come from around the world to have safety in Canada, and there is no room for anyone to try to tinker with other people's rights, you know, insofar as, you know, you can live your life and not harm anyone else. And, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head. We just want to live in harmony, and we want to make sure that everyone, especially in public education, feels welcome and is accepted in a way that helps them learn.
Totally. So मैं इन्होंने वही पूछा सीगा मैं कहा भी इन्होंने कहा भी जिहड़ा ह्यूमन राइट्स है अपना हैगा आ ਉਹਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਬੈਡਡ ਹੈ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਔਰ ਦੈਟ ਇਨਕਲੂਡਸ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ ਕਿ ਰੇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੈ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਮੁਸਲਿਮ ਸਿੱਖ ਔਰ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਚਰਚ ਗੋਇੰਗ ਡਜ਼ਨਟ ਮੈਟਰ ਗੋ ਟੂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਔਰ ਮਸਜਿਦ ਇਹ ਇੰਨੀ ਪਾਵਰਫੁਲ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਐਲਾਨੋਰ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਸ 'ਤੇ ਅਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਪੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਜੇ ਨਿਆਣਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਬਣਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗੀ ਪਰ ਆਈ ਹੈਵ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਯੂ ਹੈਵ ਅ ਬੈਟਰ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਐਂਡ ਮੋਰ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਬਿਕਾਜ਼ ਵੈਨ ਪੀਪਲ ਓਪਨ ਅਪ you know, we not too long ago Guru Nanak Dev celebrated his birthday, and we did it live with Sanjha TV. Such a powerful message of humanity, you know.
Yeah, and I think, like, especially when you think about religion, right? You know, there's only one God, but I think it was Desmond Tutu. He was asked a question about how come there's so many versions of God. Well, it doesn't speak to the smallness of humans, but the immensity of God. And so, I mean, and I only bring that up because it's like, you know, we can all respect each other while still maintaining our personal beliefs and making sure that we create space for everyone to live peacefully with the things that they believe in. And I think that it's possible here in BC.
Yeah. So ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਜਯੰਤੀ ਮਨਾਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਪਾਵਰਫੁਲ ਤੇ ਇੰਨਾ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਹੈ ਲਾਈਕ ਯੂ ਸੈਡ ਵੀ ਭਗਵਾਨ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਇਨ ਆਵਰ ਕਲਚਰ ਵੀ ਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਓਮਕਾਰ means there is a one God and they can have multiple names.
Right, and they appear differently to different people, right?
and nobody gives a bad message. All have a good messages. So we have a couple of minutes left. Your final comments for our viewers.
Yeah, I really do hope that everybody is paying attention really to the issues that are happening in BC. I just joined a gym. And the reason I bring that up is not because I'm looking so much more buff, but because the young people that I met there, they don't vote. I asked them, do you vote? And they were in their early 20s and they said, no, not really. So I said, you know, well, don't you care about how your tax dollars are spent? Don't you care about healthcare? Are you worried about your safety in the community? And voting is your opportunity to tell the government how you want them to spend your money. And so I want everyone out there, I hope you'll pay very close attention to what's happening about the affordability or lack of affordability in BC, the lack of housing, a crumbling healthcare system. Ask yourself if you feel safer today than you did 7 years ago. Or maybe you have a loved one that's struggling with an addiction or a mental health issue that's not being addressed. And put your power in your vote and hopefully vote to make some change in this province because it's sorely needed and we need to move in a direction that benefits all British Columbians.
Thank you for coming on my show, Elenore. You're so kind and you're a busy person, but much appreciated. You're coming on my show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me and I'm happy to be back.
So ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ Elenore Sturko ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸਰੀ ਸਾਊਥ ਤੋਂ MLA ਹੈ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫੌਜ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ ਫਿਰ RCMP ਨਾਲ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ TV ਹੋਸਟ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਈਡ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਐਂਡ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਯੂਥ ਪੀਪਲ ਆ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਮ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ ਮਸਲ ਮਤਲਬ ਸ਼ੀ ਵਾਜ਼ RCMP ਆਫੀਸਰਸ ਓਬਵੀਅਸਲੀ ਸਟੇਜ਼ ਫਿਟ ਐਜ਼ ਬਟ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਯੂਥ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਸੁਣਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਦੇਖਣ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਆਂ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਮਤਲਬ ਅਫੋਰਡੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਦਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਪੀਪਲ ਮੈਂਟਲ ਹੈਲਥ ਦਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ ਐਡਿਕਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟਿੰਗ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ 7 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਆਫ ਵਿਊ ਹੈ ਚੇਂਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੋਟ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਹੈ ਉਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਚੇਂਜ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਆਫ ਵਿਊ ਸੀ ਵੈਨ ਇਟਸ ਕਮ ਟੂ ਜਿਮ ਐਂਡ ਸਟੱਫ we're heading to a new year pretty soon so New Year's ਆਪਾਂ resolution ਬਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ. So it's a good time of the year. Check how your year was 2023. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਠੀਕ ਕੀਤਾ, ਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਠੀਕ ਹੋਇਆ, how's your business model, family model. This is a good time to review and set up some goals and resolutions for next year. ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ 10 ਦਿਨ ਜਿਮ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਛੁੱਟੀ 'ਚ 2 ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਸ਼ਰਾਬ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹੀ ਦਾ ਉਹੀ ਕੰਮ. It does happen, we're human beings, but I really ask you to pay some attention and spend a good quality time with the family, friends. It's a very, very important. It become more important after COVID that the relationships, your health, your family, your community and your relationship is so powerful. Us te focus karo and have a healthy, happy holiday season. Sat Sri Akal and Rab Rakha.